Hi guys, welcome back. All right, so to start our lesson today in our new unit, does anybody want to remind us what we were learning about last week and just refresh our memories? Yeah, so we were learning about resources and how different resources can kind of put some stress onto society, right? Onto a different society, onto certain societies and things like that. So going off of that, does anybody want to refresh our memories on what a resource is? There are so many different kinds of resources. So what's just a basic summary of what a resource is? Right, so a resource is usually like a physical item that humans or even animals can rely on for their everyday needs and, everyday survival, I guess you could even say as well, right? So things like land and water, those are just basic overall resources that humans can rely on. But then there's also things like our iPhones and our iPads and our computers that we can use as a resource, right? Because we can use all of those things to search things and to find information and things like that. And then we also have like our natural resources, like food that we, fruits and vegetables, because we use those to nourish our bodies and things like that. So there are just tons and tons and tons of different resources that we as humans rely on for our everyday needs and things like that, right? So we kind of touched on this last week, and we're going to expand on resources again this week. But instead of focusing on current resources that we currently use in our lives and how they can put stress onto a society, instead we're going to go back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we're going to look at the resources that different Native Indian tribes used when they settled here in America, okay? So our Native Indian tribes are some of the very first people that settled here on the land in America, right? So we've touched a little bit about the different tribes, right? So a tribe is a group of people within their, little tribe, and they, separated off into different regions throughout the United States. So some tribes were living in, the out west where they were in the desert. And then some tribes were settling here in the Midwest. And we'll take a look at how each tribe had different resources based on the different geological areas that they were settling in America, right? So that kind of plays a role, right? So what we're going to do right now before we get started with anything is we're actually going to take a look. So I've made a presentation for you guys. We're going to take a look at some different resources, and I'm going to have you guys tell me what this is an image of, and then maybe what you think that some of these tribes were using these resources for. So what do we see here? What is this a picture of? Yeah, so it's a whale, right? So what do we think that they were using whales for as a resource? Okay, so a lot of us think food. Yeah, that's very true. So we're going to read a story a little bit later today called The Very First Americans. And it's going to talk a little bit about the whole process of the tribe that used whales as a resource. So we'll get into this a little bit later, but I just kind of wanted to, go over some of the ideas that we might be talking about today. So I'm going to go to the next slide. All right, so what is this a picture of? Yeah, wood. You guys all know what that is, right? So what do you guys think we could use wood as a resource for? Yeah, so to start a fire, right? Absolutely, yeah. So, like I was saying, if one tribe was living in the desert where it's really warm, and another tribe was living here in the Midwest like we live in, where it gets really cold sometimes, the tribe that's living in the Midwest might want wood to start a fire, right? So that when it's cold in the winter, they can stay warm. What else? Any other ideas on what they could use wood for? So has anybody gone on a vacation where they might have stayed in a cabin before? Yeah, so believe it or not, some cabins are actually made out of wood. They're called log cabins. So some of the tribes actually use the wood to create homes for themselves, which is pretty cool. You guys probably know what that is, right? Yeah, berries. So they use berries as food, right? So that was another resource that they used as food to nourish themselves. All right, this one's kind of a crazy one. So this one, I don't know, you guys should know what animal this is, but maybe not. Right, that's a buffalo. So you guys might be wondering, what in the world did they use the buffalo for as a resource, right? Any ideas? Do we think we know what they could have used that for? Yeah, so they actually did use it as food. Yeah, any other ideas on what that could be used for? So they actually would use the skin and the fur of the buffalo to make clothes and blankets and things like that. And again, we will get into that because in the story that we're going to read today, they talk about that as well. All right, this one, do you guys know what those are? They look like pumpkins, but they're actually called gourds. Yeah, and this one's kind of cool because they actually use these for a different type of resource. So they weren't really using them as food as much. They could, but the main thing that they were using these gourds for was to make music, which is really cool. And we're going to get into that also this week, in this week for this unit, which is going to be really fun. Last one. Okay, I know you guys are all probably thinking, oh, a fish, right? What kind of fish is it? It's a salmon. So kind of similar to the whale, they would hunt the fish and the whales and they would eat them, right? And that's kind of similar to us. I'm sure a lot of you have had salmon before, right? So that's really cool because that's one thing that we can relate on with these tribes, right? So some of them used salmon as a resource, and some of us still do that today. So that's kind of cool. So for this week's unit, our main goal is to be able to identify some of these different resources, and then to also identify what they were used for, right? So we know that they use salmon, but what did they use the salmon for, right? So we know that they use buffalo, but what were they using the buffalo for? Okay, and so today, the story that we're going to read is going to talk about a lot of these different resources and the various ways that these tribes use the resources. So there could be more than one way that they're using these resources, right? So it could be food, it could be clothes, it could be many different things, right? It could be, to build a home, to start a fire, to keep them warm. There could be many different options, right? So that's one of our objectives, is to identify our resource and then to explain what it was being used for. And then another really cool objective for this week and a goal for this week is to also relate it to ourselves, right? So do we see any similarities between the resources that these tribes were using and the resources that we're using today? Are there any similarities? Are there any differences? And then we can even relate to last week as well. Do any of these resources that they were using cause stress for them in their societies? Or do we see how there could be, different obstacles that these tribes are facing that could cause them stress? So these are all the things that we're going to be talking about and learning this week, and these are our goals for this week, okay? So to get started right now, we're going to start reading our story, The Very First Americans, and this is going to get us started and kind of give us an idea of some of these various resources that these tribes were using. All right, so let's get started with that.